that could be rubble trench foundations. Rubble trench foundations for adobe structures apparently proved to be appropriate for these heavy structures. The rubble trench foundation was the common foundation for Frank Lloyd Wright for almost all of his homes, for example. And they're still standing. But the rubble trench foundation is not approved by code. So it's one of those things where you can go out there and you could take word for it by the people who've done it with it already, take a chance, or you can be conservative and say, gee, I really believe my government officials, I don't want to take a chance. You know, I'm okay with that, because when you're doing a house, you're really investing a lot into it. You know, you either believe in what's happened, or you take a chance, or you just be on the conservative side and say, well, I'm going to do it the old-fashioned way, and I know I'm going to be this heavy, I need this kind of foundation to support it. So I'm not going to recommend one way or the other, but I'm just letting you know that both ways have been used.
So is rubble just gravel?
Yeah, it's gravel.
About that size pebbles, or?
Yeah, it's.
So I've seen in Terlingua, those structures built with rocks, and gravel before was just gravel foundation.
Yeah.
Rocks.
Yeah, you want to make sure
It's
that
so pretty.
it is pretty.
Attractive.
But most of the foundation you can't see at all anyway. It's underneath the wall. It's not the flooring that I'm talking about. I'm talking about the support for the wall. That's the foundation. Now the thing about the rubble trench foundation in cold climates, the reason why we have real deep beams in construction is that the beams have to be deeper than the frost line. And when you're up in Wisconsin, where Frank Lloyd Wright did a lot of his work, you know, that frost line is a number of feet below the surface. We're talking about 6, maybe 8 feet below the surface. Whatever it is. I don't know. Anybody lived up north?
48 inches.
Where?
Up in Wisconsin.
It is 48? Okay. So you get on 4 feet, at least with your foundation beam. If you're digging it that far down, you go, well, gee, I'm already halfway there. Let's go ahead and build a basement. So that's one reason why there are basements up north, because you got to build that kind of foundation anyway. Gee, just think a few more feet, I might as well make a whole room down there.
Yep.
Okay?
It's the cheapest room.
It's a cheap room since you have to do it that far. In San Antonio, do you know what the frost line is in San Antonio?
0.
6 inches. You know? So we have to build just through the FHA minimums, which is 30 inches below grade, and that's really not enough to justify having a basement. So that's why we don't have basements here, because it's really cheap with a slab on grade with a real thin foundation beam. And so the rubble trench foundation, because there's a lot of voids in there, the frost line is a problem because you don't want water to get under your foundation and freeze in the earth and pop your whole foundation up. And so with the rubble trench, you've got a lot of air voids in there, so if water gets up in that rubble trench, even if it doesn't have a chance to drain out and it freezes, it's going to freeze in between all those voids, and it's not going to mess up your foundation. That's the thinking behind the rubble trench. Okay? So investigate it if you were thinking of going that route. Okay, this is the wall that we started with. The bag in the front is full of recycled glass. Here's something else that's happening too. In today's economy, the number of people who are buying recycled paper products is falling off, just falling out the bottom. There's a lot of piles of cellulose and recycled paper ready to go to somebody who's wanting to use it, and it's not being used. And so the cost of cellulose and recycled paper has dropped a lot, and it's making it very difficult for people to really make money at the supply end. You know, we're still putting our newspapers in the big, huge blue things on the curb, and they're going off to get processed. It may or may not get sold. Now, the Rabones here at Mason Green Star, as you can imagine, they're just buying a buttload of cellulose. And they're doing it for the few projects that they're actually been able to sell and get out on the ground. You can imagine what a boon this would be if we started building entire neighborhoods out of this stuff, to be able to find a really good supply of cycle, in other words, the user cycle, for cellulose. This is something I'd like to see happen, and hopefully on the south side of town, in one of those developments I can't mention, there is a plan to have 3 or 4 houses in this development made out of this stuff to be able to show that it's viable. And once all of the final tests are done, we'll be able to say, okay, we'll do it. It's passed the fire spread test. You know, this is a flame resistant material. You can throw a blowtorch on it, you remove the blowtorch, you see where it's singed, but it doesn't continue combustion. You know, and it gets to a certain point where it just doesn't burn anymore. You can't burn a hole through it. And so, past the flame spread, I'm sure it's passed compression strength, and it also passed the tornado test. I'll show a picture of that later on too. So this is something that's bulletproof. This is something that is affordable, made out of recycled material, and is very appropriate green material and very durable. As you can imagine, it's an acoustical godsend, and we really would like to see this get off the ground. This is a Texas material. This is not that far away, folks. This is something that really, so this is a made in Texas thing. We can kind of get the jump on everybody using this highly recycled material stuff. Now that white bag in the foreground is recycled glass. We have the same kind of problem with recycled glass. Not as much of a problem as with paper, but we really like to find markets for recycled material. And the recycled glass is the sand equivalent that's in the mortar mix you'll see on the lime plaster later on. Once again, those pictures are laying the block, getting ready for the plaster, and that's the mixer. This is the kind of plaster mud mixer that you want to use on a project. This is the best way to blend up stuff to make plaster for a house. It's much better than the round sort of cement mixers that have sort of a bell shape on it. This is one that's a horizontal drum, and you got these big paddles that go around. It's the best kind of mixer that's available for this kind of stuff. And this thing was just going all the time, mixing up new batches of plaster for what we're showing you. Once again, the middle top picture shows a couple of guys from Mason Green Star that are just grabbing the compressed cellulose and just fluffing it up. They're breaking it down before they put it in the mixer. But those gray blocks are recycled papers and newspapers.
So there's no curing involved in this?
No. No cure.
No curing.
But remember, we're not making, okay, the blocks, when you make the blocks, there is curing. What they're making here is the plaster.
Oh, just the plaster, I'm
The
sorry.
mortar,
Okay,
that's
so the
mortar.
blocks were cured.
Yeah, the two things they were mixing was the mortar between the blocks, and then when the blocks were opened up, then they were getting the paper out of the way, and then they were putting the lime plaster in there, the lime powder, water, recycled glass, and that made up the lime. The upper right picture, now the sun's going down, it makes it a little bit easier to see. This is a highly polished, and what I mean by polished, it isn't polished with any kind of chemical or wax. It's polished by the blade of a steel trowel going over and over and over it. This material that's got the plaster, the lime plaster, a little bit of colorant, not much, and that recycled glass. And as you can imagine, that recycled glass just shines. It's highly reflective. You drive up to one of those houses, you just feel like, oh boy, this is a Tiffany house. It just sparkles, gleams like teeth on a commercial.
Do the recycled glass have enough cutting edges to be bondable?
That's the beauty of it. It's got just the sharp enough edges so that it does bond to the clay and the plasters very, very well.
Okay, because there's certain sand that's no good because it doesn't have enough cutting edges.
Yeah, you don't want to get river sand. River sand is good for some things, but it's terrible for lime plaster. It does not bond very well at all. But the recycled glass, as you can imagine, you see a broken piece of glass, if you break it down into itsy pieces like in those little trays in the lower picture, that's a lot of little tiny sharp edges all over the place. So it's very, very, very well bonded. The lower left shows a picture of that particular outdoor little bar thing. That slab that's round in the middle, that's a round slab of the Mason Green Star block material. Which gives you an idea of how monolithic it is and how well it works even on a, well, I guess that's about 1.5 inch thick disc that they kind of laid into that wall. There's a corner that made out of the Mason Green Star blocks, and the lime plaster is that kind of reddish brown on the outside. Very, very, very